Thanks for joining me on episode 393 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
I'm Mark Aho, author of Building Wealth and Living in Faith. I challenge you to invest in yourself, invest in others, develop your influence, and impact the world by using your time, your talent, and your treasures to live out your calling. Having the right relationship between faith and money is key to doing that, and one way to be inspired to do that is to listen to this, the Inspired Stewardship Podcast with my friend, Scott Mader.
Now, that's not that big of a deal in the scheme of things, but think about how that happens when you're having a conversation with your loved one and you miss some of the things they say. The truth is, if you want to make an impact on the world, you have to learn to have focus. You have to learn to be able to pay attention to one thing and get it done and then move to the next.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's episode about impacting the world by stewarding your time, I talk with you about the myth of multitasking, why focus is so important if you're going to have an impact, and why we fool ourselves into feeling like multitasking is actually better.
As we talk about stewarding your time, wouldn't it be great if you could support this podcast and do it without just taking too long? Turns out you can. All you have to do is use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon when you're ready to make a purchase via Amazon, and a small commission will come back to support the show just that quick. If you enjoy the show when you are ready to buy from Amazon, just use inspiredstewardship.com/Amazon.
I've talked on the podcast before about this idea of multitasking. You know, in today's society, we look at multitasking as something that we almost have to do. It becomes a survival trait. You know, the idea of being able to do more than one thing at a time is something that it just seems like if you didn't do that, you wouldn't be able to get through all of the tasks and all of the examples that you have. You just wouldn't be able to get all of your priorities done. And let's talk about that word priority, right? When you look at the word priority, it entered the English language back in something like the 1400s, and it simply means the very first or prior thing, the priority, the prior thing, the first thing. What comes first? Listen to the way that I said that. What comes first? Singular. What thing must be done first? But then, starting in about the 1900s, we pluralized it. We made the word priorities. That word didn't exist before that. We somehow or another believed that if we added more than one priority, more than one first thing, then all of these first things could be first and equal. We do that with tasks all the time, right? You're sitting there and you're cooking dinner and you're watching TV and you're trying to answer a question on homework with your kid and answer an email from work and do all of these things at once. And you may even be able to do them all at once. But the truth is you can't really pay attention to all of them at once. You can't really focus on all of them at once. You can't really concentrate on everything at a time. Instead, what your brain does is switch between all these tasks very quickly. But the truth is your brain isn't very good at switching from one task to the next. So switching back and forth very quickly ends up costing you time. Simple exercise that you can do to prove this. Draw two lines on a piece of paper. On the top line, write the word, well, first start a timer so that you know how long it's going to take you. So start a stopwatch, and on the top line, write the word multitasking. And then on the bottom line, write the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through 20 in numerical order. And time how long that takes. For most people, that takes somewhere around 20 seconds. And then do the same thing, do the exercise again, start the timer again, but with 2 new lines. And this time, write the first letter of multitasking and then write the number 1 on the second line. And then write the second letter of multitasking and write the number 2 on the next line, and so on until you've written the word multitasking and written 1 through 20 on the bottom. And what you will discover is it generally takes you about twice as long to do that way. You're doing the same task. You're still writing the word and you're still writing the numbers, but by forcing your brain to switch between writing words and writing numbers, 2 different parts of your brain, it slows your brain down. It roughly doubles the amount of time it takes. So the idea is that as we add more tasks, we actually add more cognitive burden. We actually add more cost in terms of time. We actually become less efficient. We also increase the number of mistakes. The odds of you misspelling that word multitasking go up dramatically when you do it the second way than when you do it the first, because you actually will make roughly twice as many mistakes when you do it while task switching. So this myth is that if we add more tasks, if we simply multitask and switch back and forth, then we'll get more done. But the truth is, to get more done, you're better off focusing on one task, completing it, and then moving to the next. Similar things can interrupt you. Your telephone. How many times while listening to this podcast did you get interrupted by a message on your phone? Were you scrolling Facebook at the same time you were listening? If so, you probably missed some of the things that I've said. Now, that's not that big of a deal in the scheme of things, but think about how that happens when you're having a conversation with your loved one and you miss some of the things they say. The truth is, if you want to make an impact on the world, you have to learn to have focus. You have to learn to be able to pay attention to one thing and get it done and then move to the next. It's important to identify what is the next most important thing and do that next. It's important to move from one task to the next in order so that you can get them all done and get the most important things done first. There's several good books about this. One of them is Essentialism, and the other is The Myth of Multitasking. And I'll put links to both of those over in the show notes so that you can find them as well. But this idea of multitasking, it's inherent in our world today. We are fooled into believing that multitasking is better because that's what people will tell you. They will tell you that multitasking makes you more effective. They will tell you that if you don't multitask, you simply can't get everything done. They'll tell you that doing these sorts of activities is actually beneficial to you, but it's not. Instead, you have to understand how your brain really works. True multitasking doesn't exist. Instead, it's simply rapid task switching. That means if you're doing an activity where you're trying to learn something new, by the way, I used to be a school teacher, and this is one of the things that bothers me. We tell kids to write notes while they're listening to the teacher. You may be trying to learn a new skill while listening to music. The problem is when you have auditory input at the same time that you're trying to learn a new skill, it turns out that you're less efficient at learning that skill. Turn off the music. As teachers, we should talk for a little while and then give some silence and some time for the kids to write the notes because they can't listen and talk at the same time. You need to be able to set up time in your life and time in your learning so that instead of being forced to multitask, you're able to switch and to actually pay attention to the most important thing, the next most important thing that you're going to do. And to be able to do that, you have to have control over your time. You have to begin saying no to things that are less important so you can say yes to the thing that is the most important. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of time, be sure to sign up for our Stewardship of Time Tips series by going to inspiredstewardship.com/time or texting 44222 time tips, and that'll get you our best tips on stewarding your time. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.